Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining me here today. Let's take a moment to connect with our compassionate intention for being here in this class. We are not just here because we feel like watching something online. We are here because we want to learn how to be more present, to open our hearts to others, to be more compassionate so that we can help other beings and attain enlightenment on their behalf. So just take a moment to connect with that intention. And then we'll start with some opening prayers. There's a link to the opening prayers in the description of the video. And we will say these in Tibetan, although you're welcome to read along in English if that's more comfortable. The first one we'll say 3 times, and then the next ones we'll do 1 time each. Om Organ Yugi Num Jansam Pamage Sa Dombola Yatsen Chogi Ngorupe Pamajung Ne Jesura Kordu Kandro Mangpo Kor Ketki Jesu Da Druki Jinji Lo Chia Sheksu So Guru Pema Siddhi Home Organ Yogi Num Jansam Pemage Sa Dombola Yatsen Chogi Ngorupe Pema Jong Ne Jesura Kordu Kandro Mangpo Kor Ketki Jesu Da Druki Jinji Lo Chia Sheksu So Guru Pema Siddhi Home Organ Yugi Num Jansam Pemage Sa Dombola Yatsen Chogi Ngorupe Pema Jong Ne Jesura Kordu Kandro Mangpo Kor Ketki Jesu Da Druki Jinji Lo Chia Sheksu So Guru Pema Siddhi Home. Continuing on. Kunzando Sam Garab Shiri Singh Pema Kara Jepani Shunga Sozo Nubna Tatengata So Katelama Namla Sowada Ogmen Chuki Inki Podrana Dusum Sange Kungi Ngowonit Rangsem Chukung Unsum Tonzet Pe Tsawe Lama Namla Sowadem Sashi Pochu Chuching Meto Chang Rirab Ning Degen Padi Sange Zingdu Mikte Pulwahi Drokunanda Jingla Chokpashok Chang Guru Ratna Mandala Putta Mega Samudra Saparana Samaya Om Samchen Namki Sampadang Lohi Jejak Jitawar Jechon Tomon Tepahi Choki Korlo Kordu So All right, so we will move into our opening meditation. This is a brief meditation to stabilize our minds. Meditation is the natural state of mind when it's relaxed, stable, and open. And This meditation, which is focusing on our breath, trains our mind to be both calm and relaxed, and also alert and wakeful. And the point of meditation is to create space in the mind. Creating space in the mind helps us to balance our emotions, allowing time between action and reaction. And we'll learn today some about why that is so important to be able to do. And this space in our minds is the first step in the development of the bodhicitta, or the compassionate wish to free all sentient beings from suffering. So take a comfortable seat. You can be either in a chair with your feet flat on the floor, or cross-legged, like I am, crisscross applesauce. If you're flexible enough, you can sit in full lotus or half lotus position. Place your hands in your lap, gently relaxed, either just resting on your legs, or you can put one hand in the other with the thumbs touching and put your hands right below your navel. And then check in with your posture. Make sure your spine is straight. You can imagine a line going up, like a thread going up your spine, up your neck, up the top of your head, coming out of the crown. Make sure your head is on your neck, on your spine, and all of those are in a straight line. Your shoulders are going to be open, your elbows out a little bit to give yourself some space in your rib cage so you can breathe. And your eyes are going to remain open, looking gently down. So you can follow the line of your nose. If you imagine a line following the bridge of your nose and extending down to the floor, you can just find a place somewhere along that line where it's comfortable to rest your gaze. And then lastly, place the tip of your tongue gently behind your front teeth. So your mouth is just slightly open, tip of your tongue touching that spot right behind your front teeth. Allow yourself to relax completely and breathe normally. Then put a very light attention on your breathing. Don't try to control it at all. Just breathe naturally, in your natural rhythm, with the most gossamer thin attention on your breath. It's like taking your pulse. You don't put any pressure on it, just observe it. Your attention is like a feather, gently riding on the surface of your breath. And when thoughts inevitably come up, let them go, just like bubbles popping on the surface of a pond. Just let them pop. You don't have to look to see what they are, whether it's a good thought or a bad thought. Just let them pop. Your meditation is not lost by hearing your thoughts, but by following them down the road. So whenever you find yourself following a thought, just drop it and return to your breath. Drop it, return to your breath. Just return again and again to that gossamer thin attention on your breath. We'll meditate for 5 minutes. So that is a meditation called Stabilizing the Mind. It's meditation you can do just about any time. It's great because you can do it you could do that for 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, an hour, however long you can, however much time you have available, and however long you can do it without getting too worked up about how distracted your mind gets. It's helpful to start with just a couple minutes of meditation at a time, and then that way we build our confidence and our comfortability with the practice, and then we can progress to longer and longer times sitting in meditation. And if you're not already participating in it this month, KPC is doing a February meditation challenge. The challenge is to meditate for 5 minutes a day. And if you'd like to join the challenge, just follow us on social media, on Facebook or Instagram, and we will be posting videos and with guided meditations or meditation instruction, inspiring quotes to help you, inspire you in your meditation practice, and just providing some encouragement and community, because sometimes it can help to have people with you when you're trying to start a new habit and know that other people are trying to do the same thing. So hope you'll join our February meditation challenge and meditate for 5 minutes a day. And the idea is to meditate there's a whole bunch of different ways to meditate. What we just did is one form of meditation. There are many, many forms of meditation. And you can pick your favorite. You can try different ones. For the challenge, we'll be introducing 4 or 5 different types of meditation. So, yeah. So meditation is getting more and more popular in America and in the West. And many people think that meditation is, especially just the way it's being promoted, the way that it's being associated with self-care and with, just relaxing walks on the beach, or just, the way popular culture frames meditation. It gives the impression that meditation is just about relaxation or letting go, or a way to bliss out, a way to improve your experience of your life, to improve your experience at work, or to just or to make yourself happier. But from a Buddhist point of view, meditation is not about improving the experience of one's temporary circumstances. That would be kind of like playing the violin or rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Why bother? Buddhist meditation has a deeper intention than that. The real context of Buddhist meditation is referred to as view, meditation, and action. And together, these 3 components comprise a skillful path to enlightenment. And enlightenment is basically waking up from delusion. So we always act according to a certain view, meditation, and action, just not ones that are geared towards enlightenment. And you can also think of view as an idea, meditation as getting used to the idea, and action as obtaining. So for instance, if you want to buy a car, you choose the one that you think is the best. The most reliable one, the safest one, the one that's the most fun to drive, the prettiest one. And in this case, the view is the idea or the belief that you have that this is a good car to buy. And then the meditation is contemplating and getting used to that idea. And then the action is actually buying the car and driving it off the lot and using the car. So of these three components of the path, view is the most crucial. Meditation and action are methods that bring us closer to the view. And meditation doesn't just mean sitting meditation. Meditation in this context could be any method that purifies our dualistic mind and brings us closer to the view. And then the actions or behaviors that we adopt should work against our habitual dualistic patterns and bring us closer to the view. So, for instance, at KPC, it's a lot of the meditations that we do. We do a lot of actual meditation and of prayer and visualization practices, but there's also a lot of activity meditations, you could say, where we are using methods that purify our dualistic mind and bring us closer to the view through compassionate actions, through ways that we are maybe challenging our self-absorption by poop scooping after some geese, and then the action of actually doing that poop scooping is also bringing us closer to the view, because it's working against, that is an action that is working against that self-centered belief. So teachers and gurus can get quite creative with the meditations and actions that they encourage their students to do. But that is the essence of how Buddhism works. It's always in this way, no matter what it looks like, whether it looks like sitting, meditating on your breath, or it looks like, poop scooping after some geese or something like that. Everything that we do on the path is intended to work against our habitual dualistic patterns and bring us closer to the Buddhist view. And having the right view is indispensable. For instance, a sea captain has to believe that the earth is round. If he believed that the earth was flat and his ship could sail off the edge, he would never sail around the world. So in order to sail around the world, he has to have confidence that the earth is round. And then he can set the ship's course and relax. He doesn't have to worry that his ship's going to sail off the edge of the earth while he's sleeping. He doesn't have to repeat to himself over and over and over again that the earth is round in order to believe it. He knows the earth is round. He's not worried about that. He can relax. Similarly, fully understanding the teachings on the Buddhist view instantly resolves many of the challenges and questions that we may face on the path. So, for instance, we can get really worked up over questions like, should I offer roses or tulips, or apples or oranges, or chocolate or tea? What's the most appropriate offering to make? Maybe you see people of different cultures prostrating in different ways, and you question, well, should I be prostrating in the Vietnamese way or in the Tibetan way? Which is the most authentic? How should we interpret the story about Milarepa's guru making him build a 9-story building? Or is it appropriate for my guru to wear a leather jacket and paint her nails? We can get really neurotic about questions like these, but when we gain confidence in the view, they will naturally resolve. Things make a lot more sense when you understand the points of the Buddhist view. So the view that we try to get used to in Buddhism has 4 essential characteristics, or seals. They're called seals because it's like the wax seal on a letter that proves that a message came straight from the king. So it's a stamp of authenticity. Whether a path or philosophy is called Buddhism or not doesn't matter. The words Buddhist or Buddhism are not important. It's like the Buddha wasn't a Buddhist. Buddhism didn't exist when the Buddha attained enlightenment. So those words are not important. What is important is the presence of these 4 seals. If these 4 seals are present in a path or a philosophy then it can be considered the path of the Buddha. So these 4 characteristics are called the Four Seals of Dharma. The first one is that all compounded things are impermanent. Our last class focused on that. If you missed last class, you can catch it on YouTube. Feel free to catch up. I hope you do. So the first one is that all compounded things are impermanent. The second is that all emotions are painful. The third is that all phenomena are empty. They're without inherent existence. And that's the key one. That's the ultimate view of Buddhism, that the other 3 are grounded on this third seal, that all phenomena are empty. And then the 4th seal is that nirvana is beyond extremes. So today we'll be talking about the 2nd seal, that all emotions are painful. So the Buddha taught that at the root, it is our emotions that lead to suffering. In fact, emotions are suffering. Directly or indirectly, all emotions are born from selfishness. Even love. Even love is born from selfishness. So all emotions involve clinging to the self. Our emotions seem so real and we identify with them so strongly. We might think that they are us, but they're not an inherent part of one's being. Emotions arise when particular causes and conditions come together. For instance, when you rush to think that someone is criticizing you or ignoring you, or that someone is depriving you of something. And then the corresponding emotions arise. And the moment we accept those emotions and we buy into those emotions, we've lost our awareness and our sanity. We get all worked up. And the solution to this cycle of suffering is awareness. And Dzogchen Khyentse Rinpoche says, if you seriously wish to eliminate suffering, you must generate awareness, tend to your emotions, and learn how to avoid getting worked up. The Tibetan word for emotion in this context is dzagche, which means contaminated or stained. In the sense of being permeated by confusion or duality. The emotions imply duality, and therefore, in the end, they are a source of pain. Dzogchen Khyentse Rinpoche says, the dualistic mind includes almost every thought we have. Why is this painful? Because it is mistaken. Every dualistic mind is a mistaken mind, a mind that doesn't understand the nature of things. So how are we to understand duality? It is subject and object, ourselves on the one hand and our experience on the other. This kind of dualistic perception is mistaken, as we can see in the case of different persons perceiving the same object in different ways. A man might think a certain woman is beautiful, and that is his truth. But if that were some kind of absolute independent kind of truth, then everyone else also would have to see her as beautiful as well. Clearly, this is not a truth that is independent of everything else. It is dependent on your mind. It is your own projection. So if we were to examine emotions the way the Buddha did, we examine our emotions and try to identify their origin, we'll see that they are rooted in misunderstanding. And within each emotion, there's always an element of judgment. So emotions are inherently prejudice. They're a way of prejudging things. For example, if you go to the circus and you see a performer doing fire spinning, so they're spinning a torch around very fast, and it appears as a circle of fire. And it's an entertaining, enchanting spectacle to watch. And if you've got some young children with you, the young children don't separate the hand from the torch from the hand from the fire from the torch. They think what they see is real, and they're carried away by this optical illusion, and they become deeply convinced that there really is a ring of fire there. That's kind of, this person is magically wielding rings of fire. In a similar way, we are deluded about the appearance of our own bodies. When we look at the body, we don't think in terms of its separate pieces. We don't separate the hand from the fire from the torch. When we look at our bodies, we think of our bodies as a whole. We don't think of it in terms of blood, veins, organs, genes, molecules. We don't think of all of the components that are coming together. And we prejudge that this is a truly existing organism called the body. And convinced of this view, we meditate on our wish for a flat stomach, for a smooth complexion, or big, strong muscles, or artfully shaped eyebrows, or a curvy hourglass figure. And then we become obsessed, investing our actions in diets and detox teas and yoga and gym memberships and moisturizers and waxing salons. And it all comes back to that view that we're carried away by the optical illusion of our body being a truly existing organism that's just a whole, our body. So these emotions we have towards our body's appearance and well-being are like those of the children who are absorbed or thrilled or frightened by the ring of fire. And as an adult watching the fire spinner performance, we know that it's an illusion, so we don't get worked up about it. Using basic reason, we can see that the ring is made from its assembled parts. That there's the movement of a hand holding a flaming torch. And an older sibling who's been taught that this is an illusion or has picked up that it's an illusion, they might become arrogant or patronizing toward the younger child. Feel like, well, I know better than you. But as adults, as mature adults, we can see the ring. We can see the ring of fire. We can see that it's an illusion, but we can also understand the child's fascination with it. And especially if it's nighttime and there's dancers and cool music and special effects and stuff like that, adding the whole show. Then it might even provide a thrill for us adults, despite our awareness that it's essentially an illusion. And this understanding is the seed of compassion. You can see that it's an illusion, but you also understand how fascinating the illusion is. And how easy it is to be deceived by it. So whether we are considering the fire ring or our bodies or our houses, our spouses, our careers, even the earth itself, as long as one believes that such things truly exist, either momentarily or for all eternity, one's belief is rooted in misunderstanding. And that misunderstanding is a lack of awareness. When awareness is lost, that's what Buddhists call ignorance. And it's from this ignorance that our emotions arise. So every moment we produce emotions based on our misjudgments, our prejudices, and our ignorance. And there are an unfathomable variety of emotions that we can experience. There's the ones we're familiar with, like love, hate, guilt, pride, fear, shame, sadness, devotion, optimism, pessimism, jealousy, joy, all of these emotions that we know. But there are so many more. And some cultures have words for emotions that other cultures don't, that are undefined in other cultures, and therefore those emotions don't exist in those other cultures. Or they don't have a way of identifying them. So for instance, in some parts of Asia, there's no word for romantic love, while as the Spaniards have numerous words for different kinds of love. Dzogchen Khyentse Rinpoche says, according to Buddhists, there are innumerable emotions that are yet to be named in any language, and even more that fall outside of our logical world's ability to define. Some emotions are seemingly rational, but most are irrational. Some seemingly peaceful emotions are rooted in aggression. Some are almost imperceptible. We might think that someone is completely impassive or detached, but that is itself an emotion. Our emotions can be childish. For example, you might get angry because another person is not angry and you think they should be. Or you might be upset one day because your partner is too possessive of you. And maybe the next day you're upset because they're not possessive enough. Some emotions manifest as anger. Some emotions manifest as arrogance. Sometimes we force our personal views on others through strength or blackmail or trickery or manipulation. And that is also a part of our emotional activity. Desperation for respect is also an emotion. And sometimes emotions can be sick and twisted, leading to things like pedophilia or bestiality. So all of these various emotions and their consequences come from misunderstanding. And this misunderstanding comes from one source, which is the root of all ignorance. And that fundamental misunderstanding is clinging to the self. So we assume that each of us is a self. We assume that there is an entity called me. And this is the fundamental misunderstanding. So we manufacture this notion of self, and it feels like a solid entity. And we're conditioned to view this notion of self as consistent and real. So we think that, this form is me. We think that, this body, I have this form, this is my body, this body is me, this form is me. I'm tall, I'm short, I'm thin, I'm fat, this is me. And we think, I dwell in this form. We point ourselves, we think like, I live here, I dwell in this body. And we do the same with our feelings, our perceptions, and our actions. I have feelings. I am my perceptions. And it's interesting because if you pay attention to the way you use language and talking about yourself, it gets to be very slippery. We talk about like, I am this body is me. If someone hits me, I'd say like, hey, you hit me. But then I would say, and in that moment, I'm identifying my body, my whole body as me. But then I would say, when you hit me, you hurt my arm. Now my arm is kind of separate from my body. I've identified it as separate. It's mine. It gets slippery. We're not even consistent in the way that we talk about this false notion of an inherently existent self. And the Buddha taught that there's no independent entity that qualifies as the self to be found anywhere. Whether we're looking inside the body or outside the body, there's no such thing as an independently existent self. So this idea of the self is illusory, just like the fire ring. The fire ring is the hand moving the fire on the torch, and our body is, we're identifying our body as this conglomeration of genes and molecules and blood and organs and feelings and experiences and perceptions and opinions. And that is what we're calling the self. So this idea that there is an independent entity called the self is a fallacy. It's fundamentally flawed. But just as we can get carried away by the firing, we can get carried away by thinking that we are this self. And if we look at our own bodies, our actions, our feelings, our perceptions, if we look at that, if we examine it, we'll see that these are different elements that we think of as me, but me doesn't dwell in any of them. I don't think I dwell in my hand. I don't dwell in my thumbnail. I don't dwell in my left ear. And yet, I think of this whole conglomeration of pieces like that as me. But you can look at any one of these pieces. Are you your anger? Are you your right pinky toe? Are you your knee? No, you don't dwell in any of those. So when we cling to the fallacy of the self, it's a rather ridiculous act of ignorance. And that clinging to the self also perpetuates ignorance. And that ignorance leads to all kinds of pain and disappointment. So everything that we do in our lives depends on how we perceive this idea of self, how we identify ourselves. So if our perception is based on misunderstandings, which it is, then this misunderstanding permeates everything that we do, everything that we see, everything that we experience. So while I was with the child at the circus, that's a simple matter of a child misunderstanding movement and light, a trick of the eye. It doesn't really, if they're going to go home, they're going to be fine. But our whole existence is based on a flimsy premise. Every decision that we make, every opinion that we create, all the emotions that we invest ourselves in are all based on this flimsy premise, based on an illusion. So in Buddhism, there's no inherently existing evil. We don't really talk about good and evil. So rather than evil, what we talk about is ignorance. There's just ignorance. Specifically, the ignorance of creating a label of self and pasting it on a totally baseless, assembled phenomena and imputing its importance and then trying to protect it, agonizing to protect it. And put ourselves through so much suffering to protect this illusion of ourself. And this ignorance leads directly to suffering and pain. So ignorance is very simple. It's just not knowing the facts or having the facts wrong or having an incomplete understanding of the facts, incomplete knowledge. But all of these forms of ignorance lead to misunderstanding and misinterpretation. So, for instance, if you imagine that if, let's say you're looking for a friend of yours and you see him in a field, you see him far away in a field. And so you're waving and he doesn't wave back and you're like, why doesn't he wave back at me? Doesn't he hear me? And you walk over there and then you discover that it's not your friend, it's a scarecrow in the field. And then you're bound to be disappointed. First, you're angry that your friend isn't waving back at you. Why is he ignoring you? And then you go over there and it's not your friend at all. It's a scarecrow. And then you're disappointed. Now you've got another emotion about it. You're disappointed. But it's not like your friend is trying to mislead you, and the scarecrow didn't do anything to mislead you. It lives in that field. It's your own ignorance that misled you. But anything that we do that emerges from ignorance is speculative. There's no ground for confidence if we don't have understanding, or if we have incomplete understanding. There's no ground for confidence. So then our basic insecurity arises and creates all of these emotions. And some of these emotions we'll recognize, and some of them we won't recognize. But all of these emotions spring up from that basic insecurity because we have an incomplete or lack of understanding, which is ignorance. So, since the self does not exist independently, and it's just a label, and clinging to that is ignorance, then why don't we just, stop clinging to it? Why don't we just destroy the label of self? That's no small task. That is very, very difficult. That label called self is an incredibly stubborn concept to break. So it's hard for us to remember that the self is assembled. It doesn't exist independently, and it's susceptible to change. So even if we might like maybe you listen to a teaching and you remember this, and then you 2 seconds later, like a goldfish, you forget it, and you fall back under that spell of the fire ring, and thinking that all of this assembled phenomena that you're calling self, that it inherently exists. It's very difficult to break this habit. So, it's difficult to break a simple habit. Like, for instance, you may know that smoking is really bad for your health. You may understand that smoking causes cancer. You may understand that you're damaging your lungs. You may have watched all the Dare commercials or the, no smoking commercials, and you get it. It's bad for you. It makes you cough. All these things. It makes you smell bad. Your partner hates it. But that doesn't necessarily convince you to stop. Especially because, you enjoy the ritual, you enjoy the taste, you like the smell of it, you like the way that the tobacco smolders in the cigarette. You feel cool smoking. It's people smoke in movies. It makes you feel cool. So it's difficult to break just a simple habit like smoking. It's very difficult to break. And that's a habit that you've had since, maybe you've smoked for 10 years or 20 years or 40 years. Very difficult habit to break. We've been believing in the existence of self since time out of mind. So this is an incredibly entrenched habit that we have of believing in the existence of self. And being addicted to the idea of self. We're addicted to it. It's how we identify ourselves. It's what we love most dearly. And it's also sometimes it's also what we hate most fiercely. It's the thing that we work the hardest to validate the existence of. We really want to exist. And almost everything that we do, almost everything that we think, almost everything that we have, including our spiritual path, is a way to further confirm the self's existence. It's a way to bolster our idea of self. So Dzogchen Rinpoche says, It is the self that fears failure and longs for success, fears hell and longs for heaven. The self loathes suffering and loves the causes of suffering. It stupidly wages war in the name of peace. It wishes for enlightenment, but detests the path to enlightenment. It wishes to work as a socialist, but live as a capitalist. When the self feels lonely, it desires friendship. Its possessiveness of those it loves manifests in passion that can lead to aggression. Its supposed enemies, such as spiritual paths designed to conquer the ego, are often corrupted and recruited as the self's ally. Its skill in playing the game of deception is nearly perfect. It weaves a cocoon around itself like a silkworm, but unlike a silkworm, it doesn't know how to find the way out. So when we say all emotions are suffering, I think a common response to that is like, well, maybe some emotions are suffering, but not all of them. What about love? What about joy? What about creative inspiration? What about peace or fulfillment or happiness? How are those suffering? I also believe that emotions are necessary in certain circumstances. For instance, we might believe that emotion is necessary to create art or music or poetry. But our definition of suffering changes. It isn't really fixed. It isn't set in stone, and it's limited. While as the Buddha's definition of suffering is vast and also specific. It's much more clear than our definition of suffering. So the way we define happiness tends to be that when we just experience a little bit less pain, we call that happiness. But that doesn't mean it's free of pain. The Buddha taught that anything that has a quality of uncertainty and unpredictability is suffering. For instance, love may be a pleasant thing to experience. It may feel fulfilling, but it doesn't just spring up out of the blue independently. It depends on someone, and therefore it's unpredictable. So you're dependent on your object of love for that love to exist. You're dependent on there being that object of love. And so in a sense, you're always on a leash. If something makes you happy, if, I don't know, let's say travel makes you happy. Well, then that travel depends on the airlines. It depends on your passport. It depends on there not being a pandemic. It depends on your financial situation. There's all sorts of things that this thing that gives you happiness are dependent on those things, and then your happiness is then dependent on your ability to travel, and that ability to travel is very unpredictable because it's dependent on so many different things. And those additional hidden conditions are uncountable. So that's why also when, if you want to blame your parents for an unhappy childhood, or you blame yourself for your parents' divorce or something like that, that it's futile to think in that way, because there are so many hidden dependent conditions involved in those situations. There are so many, more than you can possibly be aware of. So it's never just one thing. It's never this. That's not your parents' fault that you had an unhappy childhood. And if you go and you look at like, well, why did your parent? Maybe your parents. Maybe you had an unhappy childhood because of your parents, because your parents had an unhappy childhood themselves, and therefore they didn't have the tools to help you in your childhood. And why was that? And what was the financial situation like at the time? Because what was the economy like? And you can just spiderweb out from there. So many causes and conditions for why you had the experience that you had. And you still won't see all of the hidden components that are there. So Tibetans use the word Rongwang and Shenwang to represent happiness and unhappiness. And an imprecise translation of these is difficult to translate precisely, but Rong means self and Wang means power. So self-power would be happiness. And then Shen means other power, unhappiness. So generally speaking, as long as one is in control, one is happy. And as long as someone else is holding the leash, one is unhappy. So then the definition of happiness is when one has full control. When one has freedom, rights, leisure, no obstacles, no leash. And that means the freedom to choose, the freedom not to choose, the freedom to be leisurely, the freedom to be active, total freedom. No one has a leash on you. Although there are things that we can do to bend our conditions to our advantage, like if we want to be healthy, we can take vitamins, or if we want to become strong, we can lift some weights, or if we want to we want a meeting to go well, so we show up early. There are things we can do to influence circumstances. But we're not in control. We imagine that we're in control a lot of the time. We overestimate the amount of control that we have in our world. But we're not in control. So we can't prevent a pandemic from happening, clearly. We can't, hold the earth still so that there isn't an earthquake or a tsunami. We can't stop a raccoon from running out in front of our car and making us have a horrible morning. We can't control other drivers on the road. We can't control the emotions of other people in our lives, although we spend a lot of time trying to control them. We want other people to be cheerful so that we can be comfortable ourselves. We spend a lot of time trying to do that. And a lot of the time we think that we're being kind, we're really caring about them, but we really just want to be comfortable ourselves, because it's no fun spending time with someone who's sulking. But we can't keep other people happy all the time. We might succeed sometimes, but the kind of manipulation requires a lot of maintenance. So, for instance, with our relationships, you can't just say "I love you" once, or twice, or 3 times. You have to be continually performing ongoing maintenance of your relationship. You have to do the right thing over and over and over again, sending flowers when it's the right time, paying attention when they're talking, supporting them when they need support, leaving them alone when they want to be left alone. You have to be doing the right thing over and over and over again until the end. And if you make a mistake just once, everything you've built can fall apart. So, and even if you give, even if you're giving your partner undivided attention, you can't control the fact that your partner might not know how to accept that attention, or they might interpret it, or they might not be receptive to your attention at that moment. So, we can't be 100% prepared all the time because we don't control how others are going to react to what we do. We can only influence situations. We do not control them. And the obstacles that we face, or our opponents or our enemies, they only need to be successful 1% of the time in order to dash all our dreams and do all their damage. So, for instance, one slip of the tongue, and now you're, a friendship you've had for a long time. You made one mistake, saying something that shouldn't have. You put your foot in your mouth, and then now your friendship is over. Or you had a great first date, and then you farted at a really embarrassing time, and then now you're never going to call that guy again. Someone working airport security could be distracted for just a few seconds when someone's going through the x-ray machine, and now a plane full of people are going to be in danger. It just takes one mistake for our whole world to fall apart, which shows just how little control we actually have. And also why we're so neurotic about being in control, wanting to be in control. So we might think that our experience isn't too bad. We're not really suffering. Our life isn't that terrible. We're not starving. We're not living in a war zone. We're not, we're not losing everything we have and forced to flee our country. We might feel like our lives are pretty good. You've got a job, you've got a nice place to live, you love your family, feel pretty good about it. You're breathing. But if you want to think about, you might think like, well, so I'm happy. I'm pretty happy in my life. But have you stopped preparing for things to get better? Have you dropped all of your insecurities? Have you dropped your need to constantly maintain that level of happiness? If your sense of happiness comes from like genuine contentment and appreciation for what you already have, that's the kind of appreciation that the Buddha recommended. But that kind of contentment is very rare. Almost always what we have instead is this constant nagging feeling that there's more to life. And this discontent leads to suffering. And a common question in talking about emotions, whether all emotions are pain, is compassion an emotion? Because we're supposed to have compassion for others, right? But isn't compassion an emotion? And it is. Compassion is an emotion. People like us have dualistic compassion. So it is still based in duality and subject and object. I have compassion for you. The Buddha's compassion does not involve subject and object. The Buddha's compassion, from the Buddha's point of view, compassion could never involve subject and object. It's beyond that idea of self and other and any sense of separation. And that kind of compassion is great compassion. That's called mahakaruna. So we're working towards that. So we do develop this dualistic kind of compassion at first, because that's where we're at. That's our starting point. But we are working towards a compassion that goes beyond any concept of self and other, any concept of separation. So when we lose awareness and we cling to the idea of self, destructive emotions are sure to follow. Therefore, the solution is to develop awareness. Awareness of our emotions. So when we are aware of our emotions as they arise, even just a little bit, we restrict their activity. It's kind of like teenagers, if they have a chaperone on their date, it just keeps them in line a little bit, restricts their activity a little bit. Someone's watching. And when someone's watching, the power of self-clinging is weakened. So when we're aware that our emotions are merely illusions, they become harmless. We're not tricked by the illusion anymore. And when we see that everything we desire is just assembled phenomena, like a fire ring, then they lose their allure and the spell of temptation is broken. And they can't get a rise out of you. So Dzogchen Khyentse Rinpoche says, this is why Buddhists conclude that all emotions are painful. It is because they are impermanent and dualistic that they are uncertain and always accompanied by hopes and fears. But ultimately, they don't have and never have had an inherently existent nature. So in a way, they're not worth much. Everything we create through our emotions is in the end completely futile and painful. This is why Buddhists do shamatha and vipassana meditation. This helps to loosen the grip that our emotions have on us and the obsessions we have because of them. So we can do shamatha meditation, like the stabilizing the mind meditation that we did at the beginning of class. And that gives us a little bit of space in our minds to see our emotions. One of the things that, when talking about happiness and wanting to hold our own leash, kind of like, I don't know if you've ever seen you might have a dog, you might have seen a video of a dog where they just love holding their own leash. And that's how we want to be. We want to hold our own leash. We don't like it when anyone else has a leash on us. We don't realize that our thoughts and our emotions are holding our leash all the time. We are being led around by them. When we do shamatha meditation, we start to notice that a little bit. We start noticing that a thought goes by and we're just like dragged along. We hook our leash to every single thought that comes by, every little emotion. What's that? Anger? Gone. Jealousy? Gone. You're just yanked by that leash all over the place. And you sit in meditation and you see your leash get yanked again and again and again and again. You start understanding that. And your leash can get a little bit longer. You get a little bit more space. So you can go, oh, that's anger. And then there's a pause before you go chasing after it. And then after a while you can stop chasing after it. You can unhook that leash from your thoughts and from your emotions. So you're not chasing after every single thing that goes through your head. So shamatha meditation is very helpful for stabilizing our minds, helping to give some space, because it's difficult to work on yourself when you're constantly yanked in every single direction. So you need that space, you need that stability, you need to be able to focus some. And then the Vipassana meditation helps us to develop insight into the nature of our emotions, into the nature of our existence, the nature of reality. So both of those are very important practices. And when we begin to notice, your emotions, and then noticing your reaction to your emotions and the consequences of your emotions and seeing the damage that they do, awareness develops. And when you have awareness in a dangerous situation, that situation becomes less dangerous. So for instance, if you were on the edge of a cliff, if you know you're on the edge of a cliff, it's not quite so frightening. Walking on a cliff with the awareness that you're on the edge of a cliff can be kind of thrilling. If you have awareness, you have a, but if you're not aware and like maybe it's dark out, you don't know where the edge of the cliff is. That's terrifying. That's terrifying, not knowing if a step to the left or the right is going to be your last. But if you can see the edge of the cliff, then it's kind of a thrill. The real source of fear is not knowing. That's where that basic insecurity comes from, that we have a misunderstanding of what our experiences are, what our reality is, and it gives us a basic sense of insecurity because we don't know. We don't know how it all works. So this awareness, developing awareness in this way, it doesn't prevent you from living. It actually allows you to live more fully. The idea of, I think also when some people hear all emotions are pain, they think then that maybe the goal is to be an emotionless robot, and it's not. The goal is not to shut off your emotions or shut them down or to lose all of your emotions and be a robot. That is not the point at all. It's not the goal. The point is to be aware of our emotions and to understand what they are, to understand the illusory nature of them. And then if you're drinking a cup of tea and you're enjoying the taste of that tea and you understand both the bitter and the sweet of this temporary experience, this temporary thing, you will actually enjoy the cup of tea more. So, kind of like when you're at it's one thing to be the child at the circus and you are completely taken by that illusion of the ring of fire, and you think it's magic, that this person is wielding these rings of fire. As an adult, you might actually enjoy this performance more because you know it's an illusion and it's incredible to watch. So you might actually have a deeper appreciation of it and be able to enjoy that more. So that is it for today. Let's say the dedication prayer. This is on the last page of the opening and closing prayers packet. By this effort, may all sentient beings be free of suffering. May their minds be filled with the nectar of virtue. In this way, may all causes resulting in suffering be extinguished and only the light of compassion shine throughout all realms.